Why would you allow your wife to be put in that position? I would never put my wife in that position, not for social media, not for money, not for anything.
Person has really plateaued and sort of reached their peak. I think a lot of influencers in the US are actually on a journey of self-discovery.
Something about this story never sat right. Because when a woman is at the peak of controversy, when the pressure is heavy, when the world is watching her every move, that's usually when the truth starts slipping out. And right now, Candace Owens is standing in the middle of a storm she may not have seen coming, not from her critics, not from the media, but from the one person everyone assumed would always stand beside her, her husband.
Shook hands, and I just knew, kind of, when I met her, I was like, this is a woman who, she just commanded a power. Nothing romantic was said, you know, between that day and the day that we got engaged, nothing romantic was said at all. You know, there was no over.
Because behind closed doors, away from cameras and viral clips, George Farmer is finally speaking. And what he's saying is shaking everything people thought they knew about Candace Owens. He's not calling her weak. He's not calling her misunderstood. He's saying something far more damaging. She's not what you think. And once you hear why he walked away, this story stops being about politics and starts becoming about control, isolation, fear, and a marriage that may have been built on something very different than love. But to understand how it all fell apart, we have to rewind, because this relationship was never normal to begin with.
You were born a man and you will die a man. That's the point I'm making. So give us a sample. I'll send my doctors to take your blood. Figure it out real quick. I will see you in court.
Candace Owens didn't come from power or privilege. She built her voice from struggle, criticism, and controversy. She grew up watching systems fail her, watching people talk over her, watching narratives get twisted. And for a long time, she believed she was fighting back. She became sharp, confident, unapologetic.
Email, that checks out. Yeah. Secret Service, the FBI, the DEA being involved, why this plane found something out and it cost him his life. That's the truth.
That confidence turned into influence, and influence turned into fame. To her supporters, Candace was fearless, a woman who refused to play the role people expected, someone who spoke loudly in rooms that tried to silence her. She wasn't just talking, she was challenging. But here's the thing about living in constant battle mode. After a while, you stop knowing who's actually attacking you and who's just standing close. Then came George Farmer. George didn't grow up like Candace. His world was structured, polished, disciplined. Old money, old rules, a background built on tradition and reputation, the kind of environment where image matters just as much as truth.
It's important to share that information, as Kanye sent me all of the messages. People who were threatening him, I have them all, to information share with Max Blumenthal, with people, people all over the place.
When they met, it felt fast, too fast. 17 days. That's all it took before he proposed. No long courtship, no slow building trust, just immediate commitment. People brushed it off as passion, destiny, two strong minds finding each other. But those closest to them quietly raised eyebrows, because when relationships move that fast, it's often not romance driving the speed, it's urgency. Candace needed stability. George admired her fire. But admiration isn't the same as understanding. At first, things seemed fine. They appeared united. Interviews, smiles, public loyalty.
Anything happens to me, blame the Zionists. Like 1,000% blame the Zionists.
George stood beside her during controversies, defended her online, supported her career moves. To the outside world, they were solid. But behind the scenes, something darker was forming. Because as Candace's platform grew, so did her paranoia. That's not a word people like to use, but it's the one George reportedly used in private. He began noticing patterns, long nights, constant fear, conversations that always came back to enemies, threats, plots. Candace wasn't just reacting to criticism anymore. She was bracing for danger everywhere. And here's where the twist nobody expected.
Fighting against Erica Kirk, his wife, you have to be cruel and demonic to insinuate the things that she has insinuated over the past several weeks. She's evil. At some point, her husband is gonna have to walk into that podcast room and start unplugging cords. I mean, by now I would have already done it if it was my wife.
George didn't leave when the headlines got ugly. He didn't leave when her statements caused backlash. He didn't leave when sponsors pulled away or allies distanced themselves. He stayed through all of that. So what changed? According to people close to George, the breaking point wasn't political, it was personal. He says Candace began isolating herself, and then isolating him. Friends stopped coming around, family visits became rare, conversations were monitored, trust became conditional.
And then one of the donors to Turning Point USA was telling him it would be very bad for my brand. And that really stuck with me, that one of the donors said, it would be very bad for your brand for you to not marry a black guy from the projects or something like that.
That's right.
George reportedly felt like he was living inside a pressure cooker where every disagreement turned into suspicion and every concern was labeled betrayal. And when he tried to slow things down, to ground her, to suggest rest or balance, she didn't hear concern, she heard opposition. But here is where it gets uncomfortable.
Judaism is a faith. Israel is a state, and it is not above critique, and that what Bibi Netanyahu has done to the Palestinians since October 7th is a Holocaust.
George allegedly began to fear for his own safety, not because someone was coming after them, but because Candace fully believed they were. He watched her spiral deeper into survival mode. Every noise became a threat. Every disagreement became proof of disloyalty. And the more he tried to help, the more he became the enemy. People often ask, why would a man leave when his wife needs him most? But what if he believed staying was making things worse? What if love wasn't enough to compete with fear? Sources say George tried counseling, tried private conversations, tried reasoning, but Candace refused anything that suggested she might be wrong. To her, questioning her reality meant denying her truth, and slowly, quietly, George started planning his exit. But he didn't announce it. He didn't attack her publicly. He didn't release statements or interviews at first, because despite everything, he still cared. Until Candace crossed a line that terrified him. She began publicly accusing powerful governments and organizations of plotting against her life, not vaguely, directly, loudly, repeatedly. That's when George reportedly realized this wasn't just rhetoric anymore. This was dangerous. And here's the part people don't want to hear. He wasn't afraid of her enemies. He was afraid of where her mind was going. Friends say George felt trapped, afraid that staying would pull him deeper into something he couldn't escape, afraid that their children would grow up in a home built on fear instead of safety. So he did the unthinkable. He left. And when word of the separation leaked, Candace didn't frame it as concern. She framed it as betrayal. In her mind, everyone who stepped away was proving her point, that she was surrounded by enemies, that loyalty only existed until it became inconvenient. But George tells a different story. He says Candace became addicted to conflict, that she needed opposition to feel alive, that peace felt threatening to her because it removed the fight she had built her identity around. She's not what you think, he reportedly told someone close. Not the fearless truth teller, not the misunderstood victim, but a woman drowning in fear, dragging everyone close to her under the surface. And that revelation shattered him. The emotional toll was heavy: sleepless nights, anxiety, guilt, the shame of leaving someone you once promised to protect. George didn't walk away confident. He walked away broken. And Candace, she took it as proof the world was closing in. Her inner circle collapsed. Invitations stopped. Collaborations dried up. Allies went silent. And instead of pausing, she doubled down. More accusations, more warnings, more claims of danger. But isolation doesn't make you stronger. It makes you louder and often lonelier. Those close to the situation say Candace doesn't grieve the marriage. She grieves the loyalty she thought she owned. because to her, love meant standing with her no matter what. But to George, love meant protecting his family, even if that meant walking away. The emotional fallout has been devastating. Two people who once looked inseparable, now living on opposite sides of reality. One convinced she's being hunted, the other convinced he barely escaped. And that's the part nobody wants to talk about, because this isn't a clean breakup. There's no villain with a clear face, just two people who lost each other in the noise. So where does that leave Candace Owens now? Alone, defiant, louder than ever. And where does it leave George Farmer? Quiet, guarded, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy after living in constant tension. This story isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about what happens when fear becomes identity and love can't survive it. Because sometimes the most dangerous betrayals aren't from enemies, they're from the beliefs we refuse to let go of. And if Candace Owens doesn't slow down, doesn't reflect, doesn't ask herself why everyone keeps leaving, this won't be the last person to walk away. The real question is, will she ever realize why they did?